Narito ang programang totoong-totoo, Tambayan sa DWIZ. Programang magliliwanag ng ilang mahahalagang mga issue. Tambayan sa DWIZ. At ngayon, narito na sila upang maghatid ng saya sa bawat Pilipino. Sa programang Tambayan sa DWIZ.
Magandang tanghali. Welcome to Tambayan. Ako po si Trixie Cruz Angeles. And Attorney Ahmed will be joining us soon. I understand he's quite near. In the meantime, pag-usapan natin yung hindi ko matuloy-tuloy na kwentuhan, chikahan, tungkol sa bagong IRR ng Anti-Terrorism Law. But first, let's go back. Ano ba ang Anti-Terrorism Act? We have a Human Security Act enacted several years ago. Pero para siya lang lip service. Meron tayo kasing international obligation to address terrorism dahil ang terrorism ay isang crime against humanity. At is a crime against humanity. Ibig sabihin nito, it's one of those crimes that are so serious that it is an obligation for all people all over the world to fight against it, to create laws and enforce against it. Kasi nga naman, what happens during terrorism, ang purpose nito, usually, most people, most criminals, most terrorists, ang purpose nila isn't even for themselves. It's not the ordinary gains of an ordinary person, like I want to be rich, I want to do something, I want to be famous. Sometimes that happens. But ang primary intention nito is usually for some kind of political end. O kaya, usually just a political end for a particular interest group. And they want to cause widespread fear to intimidate governments into doing something that they want to do. Halimbawa, release certain political prisoners, or obtain, even if it's not going to happen, secession. So for the secessionist movements, they commit acts of terror. Now, how did this start? It's because most countries, governments and states become very strong. And so in an instance where you want to wage war against an enemy that's very, very strong, you have to find another means of doing so. Diba? And what is that means? That means is addressing what is known as the asymmetrical warfare. Ano yung asymmetrical warfare? Pag yung isang kalaban ay sobrang lakas na hindi aabot na hindi kakayanin ng mga maliliit na kalaban. So in order to balance the asymmetry, you undertake either guerrilla warfare, yung nang aambush kayo, you maximize the capability of a small group or a weaker group. And sometimes, itong mga means na ginagamit nila ay lumampas na dun sa pwedeng gamitin under the rules of the Geneva Convention, which is to conduct war, ironically, to conduct warfare in a more or less humane way. Ay medyo mabigat itong mga sinabi natin. Balikan natin to. In the first 5 minutes, medyo malala na yung mga pinagsasabi natin dito. Pero it's the best way I can do to introduce you to the concept of terrorism and anti-terrorism. So, in addressing the asymmetry here, di ba tayo pagka malakas yung kalaban, during warfare, that's what we do. We make sure na, kalimbawa, you use higher ground, gamit kayo ng snipers, gamit kayo ng mines and all that, which as time goes on, we realize that they're not exactly fair ways of doing that, of waging war. Not that war is ever a humane thing. But what terrorism has done, what the terrorists have done is to push it to the point where hindi na nga aabot sa hindi na, it's beyond even considerations of humanity. And ang masakit niyan is their ends, they can see that as for the terrorists, sometimes they justify it as saying na this is just, we're waging a just war. We are trying to obtain some power for a group that is very weak and has possibly been oppressed for generations. Yun usually ang nila. There is no, however, dahil crime against humanity ang terrorism, there's really no justification for killing innocents even for a larger, bigger cause. So, have we said too much? Kamusta, Boss Wenel? Kaya mo pa? Kaya pa? Okay. Kasi hindi ako ma-share eh. Sandali. Para dun sa mga nakikinig sa atin sa Facebook Live and YouTube live streaming, don't forget to like and share. So, yan yung Ngayon, because it's been happening so much, what terrorists do is to address the asymmetry. Ang titirahin nila, hindi yung combatants, but the civilian population. And this is where things get really, really bad and really screwed up. So, because their targets are civilians, they can't be protected all the time. So, kunwari, magtanim ako ng isang bomb someplace where there's a large civilian population, that certainly will get the attention of governments, diba? That will get the attention of people. And you can cause so much fear that you can actually cut governments who are fearful for their people, and get them to do what you want them to do. And so, now, na-realize din ng United Nations and all of these countries that compose the United Nations that this is not, it's not only not a good thing, it's a very bad and it's a very terrible thing. So we have to protect ourselves now from those people who are going to use this to their own ends. And regardless of that end, terrorism has been recognized now as a crime against humanity. And because of that, naging obligasyon na natin ng lahat ng tao sa buong mundo na labanan nito, puksain siya. So nagkaroon tayo ng Human Security Act. Unfortunately, it caught the attention of international authorities, the UN and all the other nations. Sabi na, bakit ang hina ng anti-terrorism law ninyo? Well, a lot of that, the main reason for that is that some of the lawmakers or people interested and therefore lobbying with the lawmakers thought that it might affect them adversely. Halimbawa, money laundering. Kaya tayo may batas against money laundering ay dahil not only do we prevent things like corruption, but we're able to, yung money laundering kasi, it's a way for people who obtain their money through illicit means or for people to be able to fund illegal projects. So, the secrecy of bank deposits actually assists criminals and it assists terrorists. So dapat yung anti-money and drug lords and drug dealers, syndicated crime, big, huge crime organizations are protected by the secrecy of bank deposits. Dito kasi, kaya tayo may bank secrecy law which was created under the Marcos administration was to get people, to convince people na dalhin dito yung pera nila. And it was so that there will be more money circulating in the Philippine economy. Our banks would be able to lend more. So maraming mga ganon. So there is a benefit to that. Diba? That's why yung ibang mga bansa, ginagawa nilang tax shelters yung mga bangko nila and gina-guarantee yung secrecy of bank deposits. Pero ngayon kasi there's now an international anti-money laundering council to make sure that most countries will comply with our rules on against money laundering. So, imbis na gumawa nga naman tayo ng Anti-Money Laundering Act, but it is so weak, it virtually doesn't do anything. Bakit? We put in so many requirements para kunwari mag-freeze ng account. Pag ang sindikato kasi, crime syndicate o kaya ang mga taong gumagawa ng kasamaan or gumagawa ng organized crime, putulan mo yung pera, tapos sila. They won't be able to pay off people. And the more money a criminal organization has, the more corrupt the people will be that they have to deal with. So they can corrupt police officers, they can corrupt lawmakers into making weak laws against the things that they do. And all that. They can corrupt the executive, they can corrupt the members of the judiciary and all that. So, nagiging, kumbaga, self-sustaining tuloy yung organized crime kapag hindi natin in-address yung money laundering niya, yung capability nila to turn their illegitimate, illegally acquired money, which later on they can use because now it looks like it was legally acquired. So mahina din yung money laundering laws natin. So, napansin ito ng mga international bodies, particularly member tayo ng Anti-Money Laundering Council International. And we have the obligation to make sure na hindi ginagamit yung banking system natin to commit crimes or to launder money so that the crimes are hidden. And we benefit international or large criminal organizations. And these organizations include the huge drug cartels, gun runners, and all that. People who sell death and destruction, whether it's guns or drugs or human trafficking. You don't want them to be using our banks to benefit from their crime. So, ngayon, meron pang napansin din yung ating anti-terrorism law with the Human Security Act, which has barely been executed. Walang nahuli dyan sa Human Security Act. Why? Because it's so weak. There's no point. Diba? Kailangan may predicate crimes, ang dami-daming kailangan. So as a result of this, binago natin yung Anti-Terrorism Act. So it's part of our international obligations to address the crime against humanity that is known as terrorism. Magandang tanghali, Attorney Ahmed.
Hi, magandang tanghali sa inyong lahat.
Have you read the anti-terrorism law in the new IR?
Ba't ko naman gagawin yan?
O nga naman. Sorry, my bad. I just thought you might be interested for today's discussion.
Nag-re-upholster ako.
Nga naman, di ba? Aanin ba naman natin yan?
Next time.
So, anyway, what I wanted to do is explain muna the basics kasi nilinaw lalo ng IRR yung mangyayari dito. And part of the reason na ginawa yung IRR and why it is so clear is because ang daming nag-challenge ng anti-terrorism law dito sa ating Korte Suprema. 35 petitioners last count.
Good luck.
So what are the issues na nire-raise dito sa ngayon sa Supreme Court? Well, one is on the inciting to terrorism. Kasi the violation ng freedom of speech. Dun sa ating saligang batas nakalagay dun sa Article 3 that no law shall be passed abridging the freedom of speech, expression, and of the press.
What is the difference between terrorism and rebellion? Because there is a crime of inciting to rebellion and it is not unconstitutional.
There's also inciting to sedition.
Yes.
And it's not unconstitutional.
So, what makes terrorism different from those two and other crimes that are also connected to a prohibition from inciting to it?
Meron naman talagang difference. Mas malala yung terrorism kaysa sedition. Diba?
And therefore, it is not unconstitutional.
Kaya nga, yun na nga yung point natin. Kakaiba.
Bagsak na yung argument na yan. Next issue nila.
Well, it's not just that. Kasi, kailangan, sabi nila, even for the little things, makakasuhan sila ng
That's
terrorism.
ridiculous.
Kasi ang taas ng penalty 12 years. So sabi nila, grabe hindi ito makatarungan. Kasi, paano kung nagsisisigaw lang kami during a rally na
Are they inciting anyone to terrorism if they went to a rally? Di ba?
Maganda yung clarification dun sa IRR. Pati konteksto, you take it into consideration. In other words, hindi ko nag-post ka kunwari sa Facebook ng yung cause widespread death and destruction or intends to cause death to another person and intimidate government into doing so. So kunwari, somebody threatens to bomb Congress. Konteksto, was it a joke? Was it, may capability ba ito of being carried out? Meron ba makikinig? Diba? Sino ba tong taong to? Credible ba siya? At during yung pagkasabi na yan, isolated lang ba yung statement niya? O maraming ibang statements? Or it was an hour-long program like Tambayan na maraming nanonood tapos bumabanat ng mga napaka-credible na tao. So yung ganong klase.
Well,
clarification.
That might not be inciting to terrorism, but it's definitely a bomb joke law.
Yeah, violation ng bomb jokes.
So hindi siya makakasuhan ng terrorismo.
Correct. Ano pa? What about yung ito talaga sa Luminous maraming nagsasabi na dapat terrorism. Yung graffiti. Ibagsak Duterte, Duterte, Rehimeng Duterte. or Duterte tuta ng kano. Kano, tuta ng kano.
There is no
Something like
terrorism there and inciting to
is that?
terrorism.
Kasi ang sinasabi dun sa IRR is context, credibility, the capability of, does that
Paniwalaan ba yan? Oh?
Can it actually cause somebody to do that?
And or fear it.
And or fear it. Or did it cause widespread
matatakot
fear?
ba sila dyan? Ganito kasi yan eh. Ang mga tao na naghahangad na mag-terrorize, they usually wouldn't do it in writing or in a speech or why? Because they know that what they are doing is already a crime even before the anti-terror law was created. Kasi kung ano ang yung ibagsak, pagbabagsak ng gobyerno is not exactly a clear and specific
terrorist attack
or cause of action, course of action. Ibig sabihin, ibagsak ang gobyerno sa pamamagitan ng pagboto ng matitinong kandidato. So hindi malinaw yung ibagsak ang gobyerno. Pag sinabi mo patayin lahat ng opisyales, malamang sedition yan or rebellion or terorismo. So ang mga terorista, asahan nyo na hindi magsusulat sa dingding yan. At lalong hindi magpapakita ng mukha sa internet yan by saying things on live. Or posting their opinions and their inciting on their walls with their names clearly and properly identified.
Correct.
So ang ginagawa nitong mga to is a whole layers and layers and layers of subterfuge of pagtatago, panglilinlang para gawin itong mga to. So halimbawa, merong nagpost na sige, sunugin natin ang Malacanang, ganyan. That person posting that is not a person. Ang pangalan niyan ay iba, ang mukha niyan ay iba, and there's no such person exists. So yan. So how do you now readily apply that to anyone posting something based on an opinion? So, ibig sabihin, ang gobyerno, iisipin niya, prosecution, for example, babasahin itong post, tanga lang tong taong to. This person is really just an idiot.
Correct.
So, we cannot sue this person for terrorism. This is an idiot. We will just tell the country that, hey, this person is a moron. He doesn't know what he is doing. Ganun lang. And yan ang problema nila ngayon. Yan yung issue nila before the Supreme Court.
That's one. The other, of course, is yung arrests.
What about, meron ba extraordinary arrest dito sa anti-terror law?
Well, you're allowed to be arrested. You can be arrested.
Without a warrant?
And yes.
For doing what?
Any stage of the suspicion.
Of terrorism.
A suspicion of either that you're about to or are committing the crime of terrorism.
And that still would be based on probable cause because there should be one person who personally knows that and reasonably believing it to be true, that these people are going to do it at this specific time and place. So, ibig sabihin, the same requirements of probable cause already existing in the revised penal code and all the other rules of court, ay ganun din ang ina-apply dito. Walang pinagkaiba dito.
Yung naantala lang, nagulat lang sila kasi mahaba yung period. Can be 14 to 21 days.
Okay. Yung period of detention after having been arrested legally, either by virtue of a warrant or by virtue of warrantless arrest, that is well within the discretion of the legislature.
Okay.
Kasi hindi arbitrary yung pagsasabi na isang 24 hours ka lang pwedeng i-detain before you are supposed to be filed. A case is filed against you.
Okay.
Hindi arbitrary yan. May tinitingnan sila dyan and that is wisdom. Okay? Dahil ito, hindi masyadong seryoso to, pwedeng ikulong yan ng mga 12 hours lang and then pakawalan nyo na yan kung hindi nyo makasuhan. Kasi hindi naman seryoso yan. Pero ang terorismo ay napakaseryosong bagay. And it is well within the wisdom of the legislature to say na kung ganito kadelikado itong taong, ikulong nyo mas matagal yan. And that is the wisdom of legislature. You cannot question that.
Kumbaga, ang question nila will be more on bakit 21 days? Why not 5 days? Why not ganon? Isn't that sufficient?
Can they explain why they want 5 days?
Yun na nga That's my point. The point is, even the 48-hour, 72-hour holding period of the ordinary law, ganito po kasi yan, ano? Warrantless arrest, naresto mo yung tao, supposedly, while he is in the act, immediately before, immediately after a
Pwede
crime
din
has
sa may
been
warrant
committed.
yan. Pwede din sa warrant arrest
Hindi,
yan.
kasi pag may warrant, may probable cause na eh.
Hindi, ang warrant naman is issued by the court.
Yeah.
But pagka sumobra yan, that person should be, kung wala pang kaso na na-file, kasi mayroong warrants na may issue ng ang nag-conduct lang ay ang MTC.
Oo nga.
So ang MTC ang nag-conduct for warrant of arrest purposes
Judicial
lang.
declaration.
So hindi pa, wala pa rin kaso
declaration.
na na-file against him on the RTC. So pwede yan siya pakawalan pa rin. So anyway, it will apply both sa warranted arrest and warrantless arrest.
Okay.
Mm.
Can I continue?
Yes.
Alright. So, and then you're going to be, well, general rule it applies to without a warrant. So now, pagka inaresto, may period yan na pwedeng i-hold without charging the person. So, pwedeng lakihan yung period na yon kung walang piskal. Walang madadalang, walang inquest proceedings na maaaring i-conduct. Bakit? Pagka inaresto yung isang tao, usually, didiretso yan sa piskal or i-hold siya long enough para madala siya sa piskal for determination of probable cause. Kapag may probable cause, makakasuhan ka na sa hukuman at hukuman ang mag-order ng detention na mas matagal. Tapos, sa hukuman ka rin magfa-file ng bail kung bailable yung kaso mo. So ngayon, hinabaan ng anti-terrorism law yung period kung kailan ka ma-hold, imbis na 2 araw at the most 14 days na. Bago kailangan mo na siyang dalhin, yung akusado dalhin sa piskal for the determination of probable cause. Bakit hinabaan? Kasi ang terrorism, kadalasan it's committed by cells.
By a group of people that are already...
What we're talking about are terrorist cells. Ito talaga yung punteriya dito ng batas. Yung terrorist cells na yun, they don't know each other. And meron dyan usually nagkukumpas na somewhere else. So, in order na may oras yung ating law enforcement to get as many of the people involved, dun pa lang sa investigate mo dun sa cells, usually they're very careful. So, para mapuksa mo lang yung buong cell na yun, you're going to need time. So, magwa-wild tap ka pa and all of that and look for the people who are trying to contact this person. What else? A cell doesn't usually, while it works alone, it is still a part of an organization. So, para maabot mo yung organization, you will also need some time to find out what their links are. So, information. Bakit? Ang end goal natin dito is ultimately to destroy the terror organization. Or to be able to pinpoint and add to the growing information about this particular terrorist group. Sinashare yan internationally. That's why they want a longer period.
They must remember that terrorism, especially the ones that are done in many countries, are similar, and because the core organization that supports this are outside their dominion, their jurisdiction. Nandoon yan sa Middle East ang iba nandun sa Indonesia or Malaysia. Example lang hindi yan sa fact.
Yes.
Nandoon sa Amerika yung core niyan. So ibig sabihin, it's not easy to coordinate all of these things. Kagaya nung nangyari doon sa 9/11 na nandito galing ang bumomba nung nag-drive ng mga aeroplano into the buildings, and if the US only had about 72 hours to detain those people that they have detained, they would still be investigating the 9/11 stuff until now. So, ganyan yan. The complexity of the problem is the basis why legislature would choose a longer time for detention. And again, itong question na ito ay question to, hindi to siya a judicial justiciable question. Ito ay question ng wisdom ng dunong ng legislature. Maagap ba sila? And usually hindi yan pinapakialaman ng korte unless meron kang may papakitang konkretong example na naging na-abuse itong ganitong provision ng batas. Hindi pa nga nangyayari itong anti-terror law. Wala pa nga nahuhuli dito eh. Bakit niyo masasabi ngayon, you have a concrete example of the abuse of this provision? Wala. Otherwise, your only enemy, your only objection is against the wisdom of the legislature. Hindi niyo pwedeng gawin yan.
So, yun. So, may reason kung bakit hindi rin arbitrary yung 14-day period. Kumbaga, in fact, tatanungin ko pa nga eh.
Sa US, Australia, sa England, they can hold these people forever.
No, sa UK, it's 21 days. Like ours.
Sa US, they can actually even transport these people outside the jurisdiction of the United States.
Tawag doon. Sa atin, bawal yan. Sa kanila, ang tinatawag dyan ay rendition, and that's allowed in other countries. Ngayon, ano yung rendition? Ang rendition is, hulihin mo yung tao dito, dadalhin mo sa labas ng jurisdiction ng Pilipinas. Or the jurisdiction ng bansa ninyo. Para hindi nag-a-apply yung batas natin.
Yung korte, wala nang jurisdiction ng korte. At saka yung mga writs na magpapakawala sana doon sa taong yon, like habeas corpus. Hindi na mag-a-apply kasi wala sa jurisdiction. That is done in the US and it is done every single day. Sige.
So, yun nga yung So, where was I? Sorry. Rendition. So, binabawal pa nga ng batas na. But in the US, that's what they do, di ba?
Guantanamo Bay.
Guantanamo. Doon nila dinadala. Kasi doon sa US, very strict yung civil rights, di ba? Yung civil political rights, tsaka yung rights ng tao. So, kapag inaresto mo yung isang tao, right to counsel, right to be silent, right to all of these things. And then to wiretap them, you need a warrant, like our own ATL. So, sa kanila, para hindi mag-apply, lalo-lalo na yung right to counsel, i-rendition nila, lalabas nila yung preso sa labas ng territorial jurisdiction ng US, dinala nga sa Guantanamo. And doon, walang rights, walang abogado. Pwede ang torture, pwedeng indefinite yung detention, lahat yan. Violation ng rights nila yan kung nasa US yan, pero dahil nandun sa Guantanamo.
Which is in Cuba.
Sa atin pa nga bawal yan eh.
Okay. Ngayon, what is the alternative? Kasi ang mga terror groups dito na na-identify ay either yung left, which is only one, okay? Hindi pa nga sila na-declare. Pero itong itong other side, yung mga Islamic, hindi sila Islamic, but most of them are Muslims. Okay, na ISIS and all that are based outside this country. So kung walang anti-terror law, ang pwedeng gawin ng Pilipinas ay ibigay sa Amerika itong mga nahuhuli nila, and ang Amerika na bahala sa kanila for rendition, for torture and everything, because America does all of these things, like waterboarding and all that. So anong mamili kayo? Mahuhuli kayo for the stuff that you do, that you intentionally did, and you remain here where the laws of this country will apply to you and probably to your benefit, or we will just turn you over to the Americans.
Pwede rin.
Sige.
But we're allowed to do that.
We are allowed to do that.
Kasi meron tayong mga extradition treaties.
Yes.
For that. So, ngayon, let's deal. So, now, more or less may idea tayo. Ano yung mga binago ng anti-terrorism law? One is, yung holding period. Two, inamend yung Anti-Wiretapping Act so that we can get a warrant from the Court of Appeals para mag-wiretap dun sa mga taong pinaniniwalaan na natin based already on evidence na they are possibly about to commit a crime or in the act already of committing a crime. So ano pa? Ngayon, it can be any stage of commission and it can be committed not even in the Philippines. So kung terorista ka sa abroad ka nagpasabog, tapos tumakbo dito ka sa Pilipinas, pwede ka pa rin hulihin for terrorism.
It's a transnational crime.
Yes. Bakit ganito? Normally, dito sa Pilipinas, only crimes committed in our jurisdiction, yun lang ang jurisdiction ng ating mga hukuman. Pero in this case, meron tayong extraterritorial jurisdiction. Why? Kasi kinikilala natin yung violation that terrorism is a crime against humanity.
It's a crime everywhere.
Transnational crime, and therefore, it's a crime, you can be arrested actually anywhere if you have committed a crime against humanity. Yun ang agreement natin.
Pagkapareho po yan ng trafficking in women and children, gun running, piracy.
I think drugs ngayon,
Ganon din,
transnational na rin siya.
So, marami yan sila.
Pag nanakaw ng cultural property at pagtatawid, jurisdiction.
So, hindi yan siya unique. Anti-terror law is not unique. Meron na tayong mga batas na ganito ang ginagawa.
So, I'd like to deal more with the misconceptions now of the on terrorism dito sa Pilipinas. Halimbawa, I'd like to make it clear na even if there is an proclamation by the President stating that the NPA is a terrorist organization, hindi pa po sila terrorist organization under the anti-terrorism law kasi kailangan filean ng kaso with the Court of Appeals under the new law. I-file sa Court of Appeals yung pagkakakilala sa kanila bilang terrorist organization. And in order to do that, we also still have to present evidence. So, ang daming mga daming chika online. So, most people think na automatic CPP, NDF, and NPA automatic terrorists na yan.
Pati Gabriela.
Hindi pa po.
Pati anak bayan, anak pawis. Sige.
Now, under the anti-terrorism law, punishable yung recruitment. Pero it's punishable only if you recruit into a terrorist organization or you recruit for the purpose of committing a terrorist act. Okay? So yung recruitment, tapos ang daming involved na kaso. Alam mo ba, this is, I thought, one of the strangest but actually most practical provision, arranging for travel is now a crime under the anti-terrorism law. So ako ang travel agent. Tapos nag-arrange ako, binili ko yung ticket nitong isang terroristang to, known terrorist. I buy him a ticket so that he can come here. I facilitate his entry into the country. I helped him after all of that, isakay ko siya sa taxi. That is already a violation of the anti-terrorism law.
If you are proven na alam mo yung ginagawa mo, that you were not under duress, hindi ka tinutukan ng baril sa ulo.
Or hindi hinostage yung pamilya mo.
So, ibig sabihin, all of these things na pinapalabas nilang issues are defensible things. That if you're a lawyer who is worth your stupid brain, you would know how to defend the people who are arrested under these circumstances.
Okay.
So, maganda nga dapat ito at tatalino tayong lahat dito. Mag-iisip tayo yung mga abogado na gaya ng Vice President na tanga ay hindi yan lalabong dito sa Pilipinas sa batas na to.
Okay. Ngayon, what do we do with these alleged fraud organizations of the NPA? So, ito na nga yung mga tanong tungkol sa Gabriela, LFS, ano yung labor organization nila, yung mga ganyan. Bayan, na supposedly ni-name.
Marami naman anak pawis.
Yun.
Marami sila, and even the immoderates like Bayan and all these things are also still observing socialist principles. So delikado na sila, but maingay ba sila? Ibig sabihin, these people know how to segregate what they are doing and what are terrorist acts.
Okay. So, yeah.
But for the sake of muddling the understanding of the people, they file all of these things.
Correct. So, but first we have to distinguish front organizations, actual terrorist organizations that we consider to be terrorists but have not yet actually been declared. Pagbalik ng Tambayan, ng oras natin, 12:34 ng tanghali.
Tambayan sa DWIZ. Muli nating balikan, Tambayan sa DWIZ.
Babalik ang Tambayan, kasama pa rin sa impila na Attorney Osang Ahmed Paglinawan.
Hapon sa inyong lahat.
Ako po si Trixie Cruz Angeles. We're still talking about the anti-terrorism law. Okay? Medyo nalilito yung mga tao because they thought that immediately upon the passing of the IRR tsaka yung batas, mapipick up na natin yung ibang pwede nang sunduin ng pulis.
Sino ba ang gusto nilang masundo?
Well, of course, Sara Ilago, kamusta naman?
Pwede siyang sunduin pero hindi dahil sa anti-terrorism. She's walking insane.
Akala ko first stupidity, pero that's not a crime.
Well, insanity is also not a crime.
Yeah, but hindi naman kasi siya sa kulungan ihahatid.
Doon sa loob ng sa loob. Mandaluyong.
No, but this is not so. So, yung mga inaaresto nga for violation of the anti-terrorism law will fall into two categories. Those who are in the act of committing, about to commit, plotting, conspiring, recruiting, any stage of commission of the crime of terrorism, yan, pwedeng arrestahin yan. The others are those who are recognized as terrorists, individuals, or members of terrorist organizations. Kasi mere membership in a recognized terrorist organization
Is punishable.
immediately punishable. So, it makes you criminally liable. So, in order halimbawa, para makasuhan yung mga nagre-recruit, okay? Hindi yung mga nagre-recruit sa NPA ngayon ay maaari na nating i-arrest for violation of the anti-terrorism law.
Kasi ang di pa terorista ang NPA.
Correct. So, let's first distinguish. Let's go further back. Most people think kasi pag komunista equals terrorist. Hindi po ganun yun. Communism is an ideology. It's an advocacy of a particular economic system, the creation of equality by getting rid of private property.
And all that stuff.
And all that, di ba? So, yung paniniwala sa ganun, yun yung komunismo. So, when people say, komunista ka eh. Parang gano'n. But
Murahin mo
you
lang,
can always say something like, well, as far as I can tell, it's not a crime. It's not.
Yung NPA naman ay iba.
Iba naman ang NPA.
Ang komunista at saka ang isang miyembro ng NPA ay two different kinds of people. Yung komunista and ideological yan. Maniniwala lang yan. Ang NPA ay komunista at rebelde.
Yan.
Ang rebelde ay isang tao na gumagawa ng rebellion, yung crime of rebellion.
And what is rebellion? How is it defined? The raising of arms against the government.
Against the government, to subvert it, to replace it. Ganyan. And sedition also, kasama yan sila dyan. So, yung NPA, member ng NPA, yung combatant, ay hindi lang basta-basta komunista yan. Rebelde yan. Communist rebel ang tawag
so,
dyan.
ibig sabihin, nakikipagbarilan. Yan ang binabawal. Ngayon, activism. Is activism a crime? Hindi din po. So, pag community organizer ako, parang hindi naman ako nagdadala ng baril, di naman ako naghihikayat sa mga tao na labanan natin ng gobyerno, pabagsakin, punta kayo sa bundok at mayroong mga baril doon, susugurin natin, let's say, ang Malacanang. So, yung mga yon, that's a crime. Pero kung nag-organize ka, and among the poor, for purposes of helping them, let's say, create cooperatives,
organizing the women, ini-inform yung kababaihan na hindi pwedeng pumunta sa mga seminar, doon na lang sa lugar nila tinuturuan ng women's rights, ng reproductive health rights, mga ganyan. Ganon naman ang ginagawa ng Gabriela. Those are legitimate and laudable things to do.
Okay.
Hindi yan siya terorismo o rebellion.
Okay. So ang natin dito, ang nakikita rin kasi natin dito is most people, marami kasi na dapat natin i-correct ay unang-una, hindi po krimen ang pagiging aktivista, hindi rin po krimen ang pagiging komunista. Tatawid na yan sa krimen kapag naghihikayat tayo para tanggalin sa pwesto, kunwari, ang isang government official. That's inciting to sedition.
Or rebellion, kung girahin natin.
Tara, girahin natin itong mga to. Maghihikayat ka. Halika, sali kayo sa aming kilusan. Sa kilusan namin, nakikipagbarilan kami. Papatayin natin yung mga mawawahas na AFP na yan.
Ganyan.
That's inciting to rebellion.
Yan yun. So krimen na yan siya. But remember that not only communists do this. Also, rightists, fascist people. At saka yung mga adventurist military groups na kagaya ni Trillanes.
Yan.
Hindi yan komunista. Pero maaaring gumawa rin yan ng ganitong bagay. Rebellion, sedition, or even terrorism.
Yes.
Pero hindi ilang dahil komunista sila. So dapat magkaiba yan. Tandaan natin, ang komunismo, ang pasismo, ay hindi yan sila krimen. Paniniwala lang yan. Tumatawid sa krimen pagka meron silang ginagawang malinaw na illegal like rebellion, sedition, terorismo, mga ganyan.
Okay. So, hindi automatic ha. So pagka may sinasabi tayo na dapat i-pick up na yung mga komunista na yan, that's actually not just illegal, it's also unjust.
And it's wrong.
It's wrong.
You say it, you're an idiot. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Well, kaya nga namin ini-explain. Para hindi matagalan dun sa position na yan. Pero, once the person, yun nga, tumawid dun sa paggagawa ng krimen, then yan na po, pwede na silang i-pick up. Now, itong mga terrorist front organizations, ang sinasabi natin is in order for them to be held liable for crimes of terrorism, they're either dapat nahuli sila, may ebidensya na nanununog sila ng mga government property, sinusunog nila yung mga cell towers which are critical infrastructure, pumapatay sila ng mga tao for the purpose of creating fear. So they set off bombs, they plant mines, and all that. Nagsisira sila kahit ng private property, pero ang purpose niya is para takutin yung government authorities dun sa, intimidate them into doing something. So yun po ang terrorism. Ngayon, yung mga yung violation ng recruitment ay recruitment into a declared terrorist organization or recruited for the purpose of committing terrorist acts.
Okay? Dalawang bagay yun.
So medyo mahirap kasi i-prove yung recruiting for commission of terrorist acts. So that's why binigyan ng batas ng capability na mag-wiretap and to be able to gather other forms of evidence. Automatic ba na pag nag-recruit, halimbawa si Sara Elago para sumali dun sa kanyang Akbayan Youth? Yan. Pag sumali sa Akbayan Youth, is this a crime of recruitment for terrorist organization? Hindi pa po, kasi hindi pa po dinideclare yung Akbayan Youth as a terrorist organization.
Or, hindi pa po malinaw na by joining an Akbayan Youth, ay gagawa kayo ng terrorist actions or activities. Hindi naman makatarungan yung ganon. So, ibig sabihin, isipin nyo itong provision na to, mahirap din to kasi sundin or i-execute. Bakit? Kasi even if someone were to recruit another person to join the NPA, hindi naman yan magsasabi na sumali ka sa NPA para mag-terrorize tayo. Sumali ka sa NPA para ipaglaban natin ang taong bayan dahil maabusado itong mga kapitalista, mga ganito, ganyan. How do you prove now that recruitment yan papuntang terrorism? Kung hindi pa declared ang NPA na terrorist group, there's no way for you to prove that this is a recruitment for the purpose of terrorism or joining a terrorist group. So, mahirap.
Sa mga nagtatanong, kasi ilang beses na rin tinanong, ano daw pinagkaiba ng NPA sa ISIS? They both create fear. Wait. Okay. Una-una ang ISIS, kinilala na po yan. Diniklara yan ng UN, kaya dito it will be automatic once na-deliver na dito na yung identified na sila as a terrorist organization, identified by the UN. Andyan yan sa anti-terrorism law. Na almost virtually automatic ang recognition.
Kasi transnational po siya. Hindi po siya specific sa Pilipinas. Ang NPA dito lang sa Pilipinas yan, and originally the NPA started out as a revolution against the capitalist fascist or imperialistic systems of government. So, specific sa Pilipinas yan. Ang ISIS, unang-una, hindi yan dito tinatag. Tinatag yan sa labas. So, transnational yan. Kung naging terrorist group na yan sila sa Middle East o sa America or elsewhere, automatic yan dito mag-declare. Pero ang NPA, they are not declared in other countries as a terrorist group, and therefore, hindi rin automatic na terrorist yan sila.
Ngayon, yung mga nagsasabi na kinilala daw ng US ang NPA bilang terrorist group at some organizations, I think in Europe, have done the same thing. It's not the same as being recognized here. And it doesn't rise to the level of the United Nations. So, pagka ganun, yung level, sige, automatic na yan.
Well, self-determination, the Americans cannot impose their declaration over the Philippines. Kahit yung sa ISIS, the Philippines also recognize it by entering into agreements. But we didn't agree with the US to declare the NPA terrorist group.
Okay. Paano daw yung mga mambabatas na nagbibigay daw ng pondo para sa NPA? Well, since hindi pa declared as a terrorist organization, yung funding, which is bawal under the anti-terrorism law, yung pagbibigay ng material aid, material resources, or financing, money, cash, whatever, rara girls, then violation to ng ATL. But since this is not a recognized terrorist organization yet, hindi pa po papasok sa ATL. Papasok ba yan sa rebellion? Yan.
Posible. Or posible din, halimbawa, matitrace mo kung if you have a clear step-by-step documentation of the movement of the money, kung may money trail ka, at mapoprove mo na yung pera na yon, specifically that specific stream of money was used to do a terroristic activity like panununog ng mga sasakyan ng mga gobyerno o ng mga civilian, then that could be that could be illegal under the ATL. Kasi ginamit yung funding mo sa paggawa ng illegal terrorist activities. Para mahirap kasing gawin niya na sundan mo yung pera, paglipat ng kamay niyan from Congress to those people who are actually going to implement the terrorist attack. So, mahirap yun siyang gawin.
So, yun. So, there is a difference ha. So, wag natin i-expect na susunduin na kaagad ng police escort itong mga makabayan block. Hindi po, it doesn't work that way. And it's not automatic. By the way, pagka locally recognized yung grupo, kailangan dumaan muna sa Anti-Terrorism Council. They will conduct an investigation for the establishment of probable cause. Tapos, a-applyin yon sa Court of Appeals. Kaya hindi sa ordinary trial court sa RTC, hindi. Sa Court of Appeals yan, 3 ang justice na nakaupo dyan at silang magkikilatis kung idideklara ang isang organisasyon bilang terrorist organization. Ngayon, bakit ang taas? Bakit hindi sa RTC? Bakit sa Court of Appeals?
Jurisdiction.
Kasi hindi rin biro to Una-una, jurisdiction. Kasi ang jurisdiction,
buong Pilipinas.
Hindi. Diba?
Court of Appeals, buong Pilipinas yan.
Okay, sige.
Kanyang jurisdiction. Ibig sabihin, if you are going to declare, to file your case, to declaration of an organization as a terrorist group, in the RTC, it will only apply to that region that the RTC is having jurisdiction on.
Habeas corpus. Diba?
Samantalang ang Court of Appeals, its jurisdiction is all over the Philippines. So that if you declare it in Manila through the Court of Appeals, Court of Appeals, it will apply until doon sa dulo-dulo ng Mindanao. Such that pag na-declare yan ng Court of Appeals, it will be binding on the entire country.
After that, pwede naman i-apila ng grupo na yon doon sa ating Korte Suprema kung nagkamali. Kung sa tingin nila nagkamali ang Court of Appeals. Ngayon, also, hindi ganun kadali. It's not supposed to be that easy.
Kailangan din maraming nag-iisip. So, collegial siya.
So, dahil 3 ang justice na nakaupo sa isang branch ng Court of Appeals, isang division ng Court of Appeals, then, para hindi rin nagiging ura-urada.
Pwede rin walang corruption.
Saying that there's that. Pero may balance. They
hindi
can check
mo mabibili yung isang judge lang.
Justice. So, at pwede silang mag-discuss among themselves para it's not the burden of a single justice. Although, katulad ng Supreme Court, may ponensya din yan na i-assign.
Okay.
So, yun po yan. Hindi ganun kadali. And that's why, para sa akin, hindi makatarungan yung pagpipetisyon sa Korte Suprema na ginagawa nitong 35 petitioners. Plus, napaka-out of time naman nila. Kapapasa lang ng batas, nag-file na sila, wala pang naagrabyado ng batas. Wala pang nadadamage.
Kung nagbabasa
tapos wala pang IRR.
Kung nagbabasa lang sana itong mga ito, ng kaso o ng mga discussion ng na binabasa dapat ng mga law students at saka sa MCLE na ang requirement ng delegation of power by the legislature to the executive ay may requirements na kailangan na reasonable yung yung provisions. Pangalawa, that there are standards that should be followed that are either identified explicitly or identifiable na ma-identify mo because they already exist in other laws. So what are we saying? Na may guidelines. Ibig sabihin na may responsibility, merong answerability ang gobyerno for violating the provisions of this law and abusing it. So, nagiging unconstitutional na isang provision ng isang batas. Pagka ito ay walang standards. Okay? Walang mga alituntunin o criteria na masasabing mali ang pag-implement nyo nito. So, ito marami. Andyan nga. You can go to the court. You can question all of these things when it happens to you. Ang ginagawa nila ngayon is they are questioning the law even before anything has happened. Even before any violation was done against the standards that were put in there in the law by the legislature. So hindi malabo talagang may mananalo dito sa kahit isa sa mga to.
So and given The nice thing is that this is part of the democracy. Pwede naman nilang questionin. Wala lang guarantee na mananalo sila.
Yes.
So, hindi nila pwedeng sabihin, dahil may anti-terrorism law, patay ng demokrasya. Na-question nyo nga sa hukuman
Hindi nga nila na-declare na invalid yung Human Security Act
kasi wala namang kakwenta-kwenta.
Pulpul nga yung batas na yun. Pero yun nga, because there's no standard, there's not even a policy that is clearly rooted in the interest of the Filipinos, it stands as a law.
Ngayon, one last issue. Nire-raise ng ilang mga personalities na bakit daw baka pag-initan ng mga madrasa. Madrasa is an Islamic.
Ay, mga eskwelahan ng usually mga bata naman din ang mga nandyan.
So, hindi po pwedeng, I think that we might be taking the statements of Chief Gapay ng AFP baka out of context. Ang sinasabi lang niya is, along with everybody else, hindi exempt yung pag-imbestiga sa mga madrasa in the same way that they will possibly be investigating universities
and
that
the
might
Catholic
be openly,
Church.
And the Catholic Church who might be giving aid and comfort or recruiting once the terrorist organizations have been identified and declared.
Hindi lang ang mga Muslim ang tumutulong sa mga meron din ang simbahan. Sino bang kumupkop kina Trillanes and all these people for a while? Diba? O itong mga
Trillanes hindi.
Not Trillanes,
Somebody
a
else.
moron. But somebody else that we know. And also in Mindanao, noon pa at the time of martial law, marami akong experience that the church itself, the Catholic Church, was helping out the combatants of the NPA.
Di ba may
panahon
tradition of sanctuary kasi ang simbahan?
Yes. And not because the church wants to overthrow the government, but because they wanted to help the people. Justice and peace yan Inaabuso, pag nabaril ka na, hindi ka na dapat
pagka ka na.
Papagamot ka, hindi ka pwedeng ihulihin dyan.
Correct.
Pabayaan mo mapagamot ang mga combatants when you fail to catch them in the encounter.
Sa Geneva Conventions yan it applies to any form of conflict.
Diyan pumasok yung Catholic Church. And it was a good thing to do.
Okay lang naman yun. So wala naman tayong issue dyan. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's show. Maraming salamat sa pagsubaybay sa Tambayan ngayong araw na ito. Atty. Ahmed.
Salamat po sa inyong lahat. At I sue with Mark Lopez. I will sue those people who are against Mark Lopez.
Or who try to take him down unjustly.
It's not a stand with Mark Lopez sa akin. Sue with Mark Lopez.
We will be helping out Mark Lopez in any way that he would like to react to the issue on Twitter.
Yes.
Maraming salamat sa lahat ng sumubaybay. Don't forget, tomorrow, Karambola, we'll see you at 8 o'clock in the morning. Bye.
Tambayan sa DWIZ.